Welcome to the AIX Podcast. This is a series of podcasts that build on each other to help business leaders, especially C-suite executives, think through implementing AI transformation to deliver measurable results. Today, we'd like to provide our audience with two tangible takeaways: financial metrics for evaluating AI investments and providing ROI to stakeholders, and also how to think through structuring AI initiatives in a practical sense to reduce operational costs and drive revenue growth. Our next guest embodies the evolution of enterprise leadership in the digital age. From his scientific background to executive leadership roles across global business units, his journey represents an ideal blend of technical acumen and strategic vision necessary for successful transformation. Blake Lasky has previously served as Global General Manager of Knowledge Services at Wipro, overseeing 5 practice areas and over 2,500 people in a global organization. His career spans across leadership roles at Health Plan Services, Genpact, and a 22-year tenure at IBM, where he drove over $4 billion in annual revenue. Under his evaluate, envision, and execute leadership framework, Blake has consistently delivered outstanding results across companies and across roles. Most notably, his achievements include double-digit year-over-year month in sales growth, grew managed services by over 400% in over 3 years, and reducing time to market of new capabilities from 2 years to 6 months and below. Blake is now an independent advisor and consultant to companies in both the private and public sectors, advising and leading operational change and business strategy. Blake, welcome to the AIX Podcast. We're proud to have you here.
Thank you, Ariel. Appreciate being here.
Our first question, riffing off your incredible bio and career, Blake, is having managed P&L responsibilities exceeding billions and improved the bottom line profitability by over 300%. What evaluation framework do you recommend for C-suite executives when assessing AI investments versus traditional spend on technology?
I think the important thing to focus on is, and what most people focus on is the cost savings, but I think what people really ought to be looking at is what's the value that it generates and how can they simplify the interaction that clients are having with them to be able to drive better customer satisfaction in the end and give customers not only what they're looking for, but also what they might be looking for. One of the great opportunities in the model that we've always used is answer the question or meet the customer's needs and then figure out how to create some sort of a white space, which is what else would they need? So what do you know that they're also looking for that could help them to manage or do things that they're doing better, have the insight they need to make better decisions? And it's really based on that I think the framework you have to look at is not just a financial from a cost saving standpoint, but also how do you generate value for your client?
Absolutely.
At least make sure you answer the questions. So don't just sell. Make sure that you sell with intent.
And it's kind of like that old adage from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the question is often more important than the answer. And one of the challenges that we have with this tool set that's evolving rapidly is it's now in executives' hands in some sense. I can't think of an executive that hasn't used ChatGPT or some type of a large language model. And that's been mostly a mixed blessing. In one sense, it makes AI tangible and lets executives play with it. But on the other hand, many executives equate AI solely with large language models and ChatGPT. You and I know that oftentimes significant value comes from using more targeted machine learning applications like finding quarters in the couch cushions across an enterprise. How do your experiences with multi-vendor models and resource management inform how executives should really think about the full AI spectrum?
Two things. The first is when you look at using AI, don't look at it as a single purpose. Look at it as how it can bring together different parts of the organization in a more effective way. So, back to your previous question as well, what is the model for ROI? The model for ROI is really about integrating the different aspects of your organization in a way that creates value for your client and not just value for yourself. And similarly, as you look at the different models that are out there and you look at the different technologies, people are are looking at how to bring together different aspects of the organization. What I see a lot with customers that I'm working with is that people are dabbling, and which is great. They're dabbling in AI, they're understanding it, they're learning it, but they're not collaborating across organization. They're looking for ways to simplify or to augment existing processes to get, small incremental bumps in either productivity or value. Hard to quantify. But because sometimes it means somebody can go home earlier, not necessarily that they, do a more comprehensive job or that they're doing more for you. They just may finish their tasks in a much more efficient and effective way. They may not be doing more tasks. So it depends on what you measure. But for a C-suite executive, I think it's really important to say, if you have a particular problem statement, it's important to find out who else could benefit from the actions or activities that you're taking. Is there data that's required in different parts of the organization to serve the customer better? Are there systems that you need to attach to? Are there different people or expertise that's required to support the outcome? And what I see happening more often than not is, like you said, with ChatGPT or Copilot, people are using it to enhance their own jobs, but they're not necessarily using it in a way that enhances the overall value the organization is bringing, not only to its shareholders, but also to its customers.
One of the challenges that we help our clients through is what we call the journey from R&D to ROI. To your point, we want these technologies to be transformative in meaningful ways that are measurable, rather than a science project that lives and dies and down the hallway. Riffing off of your vast experience with transaction-based pricing models, where do you see the appropriate place for these various types of AI and driving enterprise value in terms of how we think about transaction-based pricing?
From a transaction-based pricing concept, in a traditional operational model, what you look for is, how do I get the most out of the people that I have so that I'm not sitting on my hands, or the people aren't sitting on their hands, that I either cross-train or skill them to do multiple like-type jobs to deal with fluctuations in volume or work. When you are able to do that, you can reskill and get to a transaction-based price model that meets a particular organization's needs. And there's all sorts of efficiencies built into that if you can manage it effectively. What happens with AI, which is kind of the next step in the next evolution, is that you can move to, how does transaction-based pricing create value? And then price according to the value, as opposed to, how do I just leverage the skill set that I have? So transaction-based pricing actually goes from not just a cost per transaction in an operational sense, but it goes from a cost per transaction to an outcome-based sense. And there are many, many different types of examples of where this occurs. If you're getting a particular medical procedure and you want to pay for the transaction cost for the different things that go along with it, you could look at not just what the doctor did, but did it actually contribute to a better outcome? And if it did create that better outcome, then you would pay for it based upon the value and not necessarily all the other things that may have come along with it. So it puts you in a position where you can negotiate with providers. It puts you in a position where you can even internally look at optimizing what you're doing.
We're always in the business of people, process, and technology. And this is one of those times where technology can help us actually leapfrog certain cumbersome processes. One of the examples is really knowing a priori what the value chain for certain activities is. Oftentimes that would take several quarters to sort of get the KPIs in place and, really do a lot of process engineering and understanding. Are there creative ways to leapfrog some of that with, applying machine learning and having it just pointed at a bucket of data, maybe even unstructured data, to sort of find non-obvious drivers of value creation, versus the traditional method where, it was more of a waterfall where we would do months and months of process engineering and understanding and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'll kind of back up a little bit, but I used to work with a client that was the first to get to 1 million customers in the internet. And what was really interesting about how they got there was their whole model was learn by doing, right? They didn't test, and this was a bank. So imagine a bank saying, we're going to learn by doing. We're not going to test things until they're perfect and then implement them. We're going to learn by doing. So it's a sense and respond. And by doing that, they were 6 months to a year ahead of every other financial institution that was out there. They encouraged their clients at that time to also engage with them in that way, because their clients were encouraged by the fact that new things were coming. They were providing feedback. Then the systems were changing. They were doing 2-week drops on their internet bank site. And they went from a very small nascent, internet presence to over 1 million customers in less than a year. It was just tremendous. I think the same thing is true with AI. I think that there is a huge opportunity to also not only just sense and respond, but with all the different models that are out there and different techniques that are out there, there's the opportunity to try things and learn from those things. So, to use a term or overuse a term, the co-pilot, right? you could create this concept where your smartest people can oversee what's actually going on there to determine if it's right or wrong and direct it accordingly, and be able to sense and respond and let the AI systems learn from customer behavior or internal process behavior to make recommendations on things that can be automated or things that can be improved or eliminated or standardized, and use that to better how you serve and build your products, how you serve your customers, or how you actually manage your internal operations in a more efficient and effective way. So there's a lot of opportunity to learn quickly and adjust quickly using different AI models. It's not going to be perfect all the time, so there does need to be some oversight, and that's what we've seen. And in some cases, the learnings allow you to make better decisions going forward. And so you just have to make a decision, especially across the organization. You're not going to risk the business on this, but there are places where you can put these techniques in work to work for you and drive significant value much faster. So I think it's something that AI will encourage customers to do. But I also know on the other side of this, I've worked with customers that say, gee, my biggest problem with automation or artificial intelligence or something else is if I do it wrong, I do it wrong 1 million times really quickly. And that's a fear. So there has to be some level of oversight. There has to be a risk reward, and there has to be some level of intelligence that goes into building the model to ensure that you're at least directing it in the right way.
Getting back to your first example of doing things, testing them, failing fast, that's very much a cultural thing that comes from smaller companies and startups and that sort of world. And we're kind of bringing this culture into slightly larger organizations. And that has all kinds of cultural nuances and implications. So I wanted to switch a little bit and talk about the people side of our business, because it's so important. You've shared with me an interesting story about AI failing due to cultural nuances when using 100% US resources.
Right.
Can you share that with us a little bit and tell us a little bit about, when AI fails, having to do with people and culture and those sort of soft nuances that we need to pay attention to?
If you think about it, this particular situation was creating marketing material. So not something that you would consider to be all that challenging or difficult. It's pretty repetitive. It's pretty simple. You look at the search engine optimizations or SEM, SEO type analysis. You make changes to the website. You add additional search criteria around it. Pretty simple, right? On the surface, very simple stuff. And it was for small businesses. And it's ensuring that these clients are getting, the greatest amount of hits at their website for the dollar that's being spent. And so it's a very proactive thing. We used an LLM. We used a grammar tool. We used a bunch of different things to look at the context, the restructuring of information, et cetera. But the problem was we had cultural issues that made it difficult for people to understand things like geographic names, cities, regions, et cetera. So everything was new, and it just couldn't be developed through these tools. These tools could not generate because the people didn't know the questions to ask. The second thing that happened was there were words that had different meanings and conceptually did not make sense in the culture that we were asking the people to then use these words. And so as a result, the words were being misused. The advertisement or the content for the website was actually being generated incorrectly because they were asking the wrong questions of the AI tool to generate information for something that wasn't what they understood, but what they thought they understood. And so it was a miss. What we ended up doing is going back and saying to the client, look, we believe this is the right way to do things, but we also believe you have a skill set, a really strong internal skill set that can use these tools to augment what you do and drive benefit in a way that's going to help you save a significant amount of money, or at least be able to take on the growth that you need to without additional cost, which will improve your margins and better serve your customers with the existing staff that you have. And that's what they ended up doing. And it was incredibly successful. So, they used the tools and so it wasn't a question of outsourcing to save money. It was really a question of how do we retool our business and leverage the skill set we have to be effective, to then drive, the outcomes that our customers and our business expects.
It really gets down to that human part. Often in times with AI, we talk about a human in the loop. And with that particular example, the QA and the closed loop and the acceptance testing, it seems really important. It almost amplifies the role of the human in that situation. I wonder if there are some best practices for companies to help think through, that change management is not just a box on a project plan, but it really needs to be thought through in terms of like helping work in a co-pilot fashion with AI to help, make your job easier, but also amplify, where 1 and 1 equals 3, as opposed to, 2 in that scenario.
Other places that we've seen that are quite interesting is, what if I have to do consolidation of a process across, maybe I've done multiple acquisitions, or maybe I just historically have a lot of different ways in which I've implemented a product. They're all different, and I have to bring them all together. One of the opportunities that we've seen, doesn't work in all cases, but it's something that certainly should be considered, is using AI tools to document, not just document, but understand the process, understand how to optimize the process, look for the gaps between the different processes based upon the business, and then come back with recommendations on how to integrate and improve. So it can learn what's working. It can learn where there's improvements. Additionally, it can understand the different, the ecosystem in which those systems operate in, and look for opportunities as well to start to drive greater efficiencies, as well as simplification in that. The other thing, and this is something that was kind of unique to one of my jobs, was we had a number of customers that asked us to build systems very quickly with very small groups of people, and then to iterate on them very quickly, and then to automate them. It's not a one-way street. This is something that you can, people are important. They will remain important. You have to have the corporate knowledge to be able to understand what you're seeing and to interpret it correctly, and then to use that information effectively. But the one thing that needs to be also considered is not just the people, but how you deploy, the governance of AI. And it's a lot like, in my mind, it's a lot like data. If you have lots of data governance processes and you've got lots of independent data islands out in your organization, it creates challenges on integrity and integration. And I think AI potentially could be that complicated as well if you let it, right? So I think you need a strategy, you need a North Star for how you're going to set up, how you're going to manage, how you're going to integrate all the different things you're doing around AI in order to leverage the benefit of AI across your organization, and not just look at it as a task-by-task catalyst or accelerator.
Along those lines, one of the things that's working well for us as we help our clients think through these changes is setting up a cross-functional center for data excellence to sort of be aware of the handoffs and the possibilities between data silos, as it were. And one of the pitfalls that we're seeing now is we had system silos, we had system and data silos in the first wave of technology. Now we've got AI silos where every department has their co-pilot or their agent that they're working with. So Wanted to switch the conversation and explore a little bit further this sort of change from human capital to data capital as we see it. And I'm going to ask you a hard question, and it's one of these things that none of us really wants to say out loud or talk about, but it's this idea of the changing org chart. And today we're not super concerned about change management or what that future state of the org chart looks like. We see the same boxes on the org chart, and we see everybody amplified or departments amplified by co-pilots. What happens when we move from co-pilots to digital twins to something else? In other words, it's not always a given that all the boxes on that org chart that we see today are going to look exactly the same way, because a lot of the processes were built around human-centric collaboration. How do you think about that in a way that inspires executives and their teams versus freaking them out about a lot of the things that people are freaked out about AI?
Let me back up a little bit and just say, in the few years that I've been in the industry, org change has served really two purposes, and the primary purpose is to swing the pendulum, to create a different set of people that now are doing different things, and as a result, see if that new perspective drives a different operating model within the organization. The other is just to shake the boat. And so it doesn't always answer the question. I mean, it doesn't always answer the issue that's there. The org change only addresses part of the issue. I think that when you think about AI, I think having Agile as a process that you embrace organizationally, and that you have a leadership team that takes seriously not just their own organizational outcomes, but also looking across and driving additional benefit into other parts of the organization as a result of the investments or activities they're involved in, is critical. You have to have that. You can't solve organizational change isn't the only thing that's there. There also has to be an operating model, and there has to be a governance model that drives, the behavior in a way that's going to enable your team to be effective. And it always goes back to, and I'm working with a couple of different companies right now, one of which, is very focused. In fact, most of the companies I've worked with, they're very focused on their own internal organizations. I've got to save 20%. I've got to get my, productivity up. There are a lot of different things I have to do. And if you just look in that box, it becomes very, very difficult. It's easy. It's easy to find as you said, 25 cents here, 25 cents there in the couch, and I'm going to get to the end number. But that's not going to drive the transformational change that leading companies are looking for. Leading companies are looking for organizations that are willing to cross organizational boundaries to solve, the operational and customer issues. And some of them are going to do it with technology, and some of them are going to do it with technology and org change. And the reality is it's going to be a combination of both. You're going to need some level of organizational change to support the behavior change, because that's how you break the existing momentum. But then you also have to have some level of technology that starts to integrate your company in ways that your customers want, but is difficult on the back end or from an operational or IT perspective that you're not able to do. So there's no panacea here. But it's a constant struggle, and it's been something that I've seen ever since I've entered in the business community from the scientific community. Is that the one thing is that everything will always change, nothing stays the same, and even if you have a picture what the future should look like, to get there, once you get there, it's going to change again. And so AI is another one of those transformation points, and there is an organizational change and an operational change that needs to take place in order for this to be effective. I don't know if I answered your question, Ariel, but everybody is struggling with this.
You absolutely did, and it dovetails perfectly into my second follow-up, which is, how should leadership teams think about strategically planning for AI transformation, and specifically from a C-suite perspective, how should companies be thinking about balancing their AI investments between operational improvements and strategic innovation? Do you have a staging approach that you recommend for moving AI from experimental initiatives to core business drivers?
So I've built in the past innovation transformation centers. I've implemented a lot of transformation initiatives. There will always be change the business, constant, continuous improvement in organizations. It has to occur. It takes place quickly. It's something that's a kind of a no-brainer, and it needs to be part of the culture of a company. That piece will always happen. The bigger piece is how do you create the larger change within it, and how do you support that? I think there's a governance, a change management governance and an ELT type function along with a PMO that needs to be put in place that looks across your organization and identifies the opportunity where the benefits could be increased if more people participate in how these technologies are brought together or leveraged. So if I'm going to build, for example, a large LLM, or I'm going to use a gentle AI, in my call center, and I'm going to learn a lot about my customer from a CRM standpoint, can I take that same technology and use it as a sales aid to help my salespeople understand what customers are asking for? Can I use it to drive sales activity? Can I use it to improve my product development cycle because I'm going to get information, not just to mention within the organization that I need that information to better serve the customers that I have. So how do I expand beyond the four walls of the existing organization that's implemented to help drive the change in the organization that's going to create differentiated value long-term? And so that only happens if leadership at the CXO level, at the C-suite, take this seriously and look at the P&L of the whole company as they involve themselves in this, and also make sure that you have resource availability, because it's one thing to sit up in a planning meeting and to say, yeah, I'm going to do all these things. Everybody goes, great, go do it. But the reality is nobody's going to support you because they just don't have time. They've already overcommitted their entire staff. They've got business as usual activities. So I also recommend that you bring in some sort of a catalyst, somebody who can help you to manage it, because you need somebody who's apolitical, who is able to look across the aisle and is able to have the one-off discussions to be able to connect the dots and drive these initiatives without having to get bogged down by the day-to-day issues which come up and stop things from happening. And so the big issue that I've seen isn't the intent isn't the organizational structures that have been put in place. It's really the ability to get past the fact that I have 120% commitment on the resources I have, and therefore to drive these incremental larger initiatives becomes that much more difficult to get the resources aligned around it because the payback isn't short term.
I really wanted to amplify one of the things that I heard, which was when you said help the leadership see that the benefits increase as more people participate. And I had never really thought about it in that way before, because a lot of times we have a lot of these initiatives, and obviously leaders are quite protective of their teams and their team's time. Is this meeting adding value to the organization? I had never really thought about it in terms of putting a KPI around measuring incremental benefits by adoption. And that actually turns the key for us, because one of the key challenges that we see in our business is that you can provide the greatest models or dashboards. As corporate anthropologists, we sort of put these tools, these advanced tools, in the hands of organizations. Sometimes they adopt it, sometimes they never even look at those models or dashboards, et cetera. So really creating this idea of incremental benefit tied to participation and meaningful participation in the transformation, I think is a really, really great way to look at it, that balances a lot of things across the organization. So thank you for that. Wanted to talk a little bit about, how companies partner with organizations such as ours. There's a lot of work to be done here. The heroes inside your company, from the engineering standpoint, operations, finance, they're really doing what we call the KTLO, which is keeping the lights on. It's inevitable that you raise your hand and you ask for some help, and have some data vendors and AI vendors that you bring in to help level up capabilities. The question here is around the true cost of AI partnerships, and specifically, one of the observations you made in us speaking was that a lot of times companies select AI vendors who, quote unquote, give away the house. to win RFPs, and this sometimes leads to unsuccessful partnerships. As a C-suite leader evaluating AI proposals, what are the hidden costs you should consider beyond the attractive initial price tag?
There's different parts to this question. The first is, giving away the house. Free is free, and sometimes that's good enough, right? If I can generate some incremental value by using some piece of AI that happens to be sitting inside a particular tool, and it gives me benefit in what I do, that free is free. That's unfortunate, but everybody runs on a budget, and the big projects are also a little scary, right? Because they're complex. The companies have a lot of legacy baggage, and integrating legacy into new technology is not always the easiest thing to do. So the hidden cost, as you said, is when you start to do this, and we've seen this every technology generation since I can remember, right? PCs are going to solve all the world's problems. Mainframes are too slow, too difficult. So everybody got their own PCs. Then you had islands of automation, and then you had departments of automation, and then you have, and so we just we allow people access to help them, and it helps them, but then everybody gets to the same spot and they got to find the next level of capability. We're there with AI. And so it's not just about cost. It's about what is the future cost to me as I move forward, and how, as a senior level person, am I going to manage that? A lot of times we only think year to year. And so, I've got a budget this year, I've got certain targets this year, and as a result, free is a really good thing, and it gives me the benefit. I can bring, $20 back out of 100 that I didn't have in my budget going into this year. But 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, when I'm starting to want to expand my technology base into a larger organization, somebody's got the same thing over here or a little bit different, and somebody's implemented the same thing but a little bit different over there. Now all of a sudden I've got the same problem I had before. I have no North Star other than I had AI as kind of everybody use AI. But if everybody goes off and buys and uses their own AI, whether it's free or not, if I don't have a North Star and a strategy for how I'm going to start to integrate all this capability together, and what I have, and it's not just about integrating, it's also about what's the next step. How do I stay ahead of this? Because I'm now creating legacy, and that legacy becomes a technical debt, and that technical debt can become, a challenge on the next iteration. And so do I have advisors that, like Paragon, that can come in and help me identify what is the North Star, but more importantly, what can I learn in all these little things that I'm doing, and how can I bring them together? And what does that roadmap look like so that I can avoid significant cost and disruption downstream, but actually move towards more of a strategic outcome over a multi-year plan? And so are there checkpoints? Are there, am I structuring and using and cleaning the data in a way that's going to support different parts of the organization? Or do I have to touch it multiple times in order to get it fixed? Am I writing the rules in a way that only serves one organization, but I could have, when I was in there, done more as a result of, other parts of the process? Am I using the different models that are available to me effectively, or am I trying to force fit one model in because I own it for free? There's a lot of aspects of this that, and a perfect example, I worked with a large company at one point, and they collected hundreds and hundreds of data points that they needed to manage their business. And they only quality checked about half a dozen of them. And so the reality is when people got more intelligent and wanted to use that information more effectively, all the other data points created so much noise because there's so many errors and the quality was so bad that they had to go back and rethink how to restructure that information and how to actually bring the improvements in the quality of data to support that. That's one thing. The other thing, though, and I think it's important to touch on, is it's not always one vendor. So you don't have to just focus on a single vendor. Oftentimes, it's really good to think about working with a couple vendors and in fact, have them overlap. And the reason is that you can create, one of the techniques I've used in the past with clients is let me earn your business. And so I already have a part of your business, or I'm going to, but you don't have to give me a large piece. Just give me a little piece, and then let me earn the right to grow. So I'm not just going to sell it. I'm going to be a partner of yours, and I'm going to show you why you made the right decision after the sale to grow it, which has been a huge tenet in kind of the introduction of what I've been able to accomplish is how do you drive, incremental growth once you've sold it? It's not just about selling. It's about making sure that you can grow. And so how do you bring value to the relationship? By bringing in multiple vendors to drive that competitive duopoly or more, it creates a sense of change is good. Continuous improvement is better. Value creation is relevant. And then it comes back to the KPIs. And I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, and I forgot to mention it, is, as you set KPIs are contractual. KPOs or objectives change all the time. And so you can meet all your, KPIs and be contractually really strong, and you may not be meeting the needs of the business. And so it's really important to understand what you think you need today or what you need today, doesn't really matter, is unlikely going to be the same thing you need or you do need tomorrow. And so be willing to change. Having multiple vendors gives you the opportunity to create that competitive model in your environment. Now, I'm not talking about 15, 20 vendors, keep it small, so you can manage it, but give the opportunity between the vendors to challenge one another. And don't be afraid to let them work together either, right? Because it just benefits everybody. And so when you think about, the hidden costs, which is how we started this, the hidden costs are simplify your environment. Work with people to give you the North Star and bring together the different initiatives you have, whether they're free or not. Don't overinvest in something that doesn't fit because you got it for free. Make sure you're using the right things in the right place, and then have a vision for where you want to take the business and have somebody that can come in to guide you along the way, because it's unlikely that you're going to have the insight or the experience on your own team to be able to do that. You'll have very, very smart people. And if you give them a problem, they've been solving them for 100 years for you, they'll continue to solve them. And nobody's questioning how smart they are, but they may not have the experience and they may not have the ability politically to achieve the outcomes that a partner like Paragon could bring.
One of the things that we try to help companies look at is balancing multiple vendors and especially multiple individual project-based requests for proposal or RFPs. Versus realizing that once you become a data-driven organization, you have an ongoing intelligence need that might better be served by a managed services approach similar to the managed intelligence provider or MIP offering that Paragon has. What is the framework or sort of quick back of the envelope that you would help executives think about the cost implications of finding that Goldilocks point between having one vendor versus having, a bunch of vendors running around like Keystone Cops with individual point RFPs? How do we get executives to that Goldilocks point?
There's obviously a financial consideration, but these days there's a bigger consideration that drives it. And if it's leveraged properly, you can think about it differently. I would suggest that you think about this as business continuity and business continuity planning. If you drive and you build a model where you have multiple vendors in different parts of your ecosystem doing similar things to one another, moving the work from one vendor to the other becomes a non-event. It also becomes an opportunity for one vendor to outshine the other vendor. You can continue that. Now, if one vendor goes away, you can move all the work to that vendor and bring in another vendor and then replicate the model going forward. Again, minimally disruptive. And when you consider, the world situation, and you consider the socioeconomic, you consider pandemics, wars, everything else, we've been hit with things we haven't had to do in the past. And by implementing this type of a model, you give yourself an opportunity to manage your business continuity effectively, but at the same time, you give yourself a two-horse race that's helping you to drive improvements. And that's why, when I said before, KPIs versus KPOs, if I can improve what I'm doing, and I think it's also important to understand, not everything's automated, right? There's got to be, you've got to retain knowledge. You've got to be able to interpret the information. You have to be able to take the course corrections. You have to be able to identify what's working and what's not working. You need intelligent people to look across your systems, to be able to understand what is and is not happening outside of the core process that's going to drive you a particular way. The systems are not going to run your business. You still need really smart people that understand different parts of your business to help guide it and to also manage it effectively and make the decisions.
Turned a key in my head yet again, Blake. This idea of business continuity as it pertains to a data supply chain resilience. During the pandemic, we work with a lot of customers to help figure out their physical supply chain resilience. And I had never really thought of that before in terms of companies now, as they become data-driven and transformed, they now have an intelligence and data supply chain resilience consideration as well, which is incredible.
Yeah, the design we took, which was really interesting, was we said, what's critical work? And so we made sure that every vendor that was in the environment standalone had the ability to do whatever the critical volume was. And so if one day one vendor had 25% of the workload and another vendor had, and they did different parts of the workload, some were makers, some were checkers, some were makers and checkers, and so on and so forth. But they were in different locations. I already had to pay for the connectivity to them. I already had access for them to my system. But if I had to shut one down one day, I could move the critical workload to the other and not have to train people. I'm up and running the same day. As a result, the value to a customer was, I'm not paying a huge amount of money for business continuity. I don't have to worry about 25 desks sitting in some center that's never been tested, and I've got to drive people halfway across the country to get them there, and none of them are going to go because their family needs them at home. I've already got it built in. And we did this from a geographic standpoint, not just within a country, but also across the globe. And that really helped. But at the same time, I can change. And so we saw this as well, where a vendor was completely changed out of the environment. Another one was brought in, and it was, the transition costs were negligible.
Right.
But it also gives you the ability to think about, and I think the same is true in IT and AI and everything else. You still need to have that, what you want to stay up. You want to see what's going on. You don't want your horse in one boat.
This has been fantastic, Blake. And as we wrap up, we promised our audience of C-suite leaders some sort of framework or practical takeaway on how to evaluate the strategic case for AI transformation. And specifically, I've been fascinated by your evaluate, envision, and execute methodology. How would you recommend that they perhaps apply that to different executive functions to make sure that the AI investments not only improve the operational performance, but also can do other things such as enhance market position, customer experience, and drive shareholder value?
The best way to do this is to, put a process in place either on a quarterly, monthly, or semi-annual basis where you identify, and like anything else, what are the critical, North Stars for your business? What is it that needs to be accomplished short-term, long-term? And then what are the incremental steps that you can take and apply a single owner across your organization, and then put a team with that's cross-organizational, that has, the bandwidth to make it work, and then track it, set milestones and track it. What I've found more often than not, and why initiatives fail, isn't because you haven't done those things I just talked about. It's because you allow them to change. Right? Somebody comes and says, well, remember we had an outage last week and everything went sideways, and so now we're delayed 6 weeks, right? Or, we didn't buy that product, and so therefore we got to do something different. And you need to have less of a casual process for managing this, and much more a formal process and a vetting and headlights, and make intelligent decisions about why things are happening. Don't allow the starting place and the end place to change. Because if you do, then what happens is you end up with these programs that go on for 27 years and they've changed 63 times and nobody thinks you're successful.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if they change 27 times, they're 27 different projects, or they're 63 different projects, but it looks like one because it was always called AI or whatever it happens to be. You need to make sure that the starting point and the end point are tracked, that you have clear measurable outcomes, you have clear actionable results, you've got economic value tied to it, you've got buy-in of the organization, and hell or high water, you're either going to execute that or somebody loses their job. And so I hate to say it, it really comes down to that, right? Either through a partner or through through better discipline internally. You got to drive to the out because there's too many things, as you said, keep the business running, or, that just continually disrupts these types of initiatives within most companies.
Who in your mind is the best single owner of these types of initiatives in the organization?
It's somebody who has a cross-organizational acumen, somebody who has crawled, walked, run within the organization and has the ability to navigate, the political landmines that are throughout an organization. So it's generally somebody at, just below the C-suite. Give it to that individual as a, whether it's, the SVP of operations or, the chief technology officer, it doesn't matter. It has to be somebody with the credibility and the wherewithal to be able to pick up the phone and get something done. It can't just be a project in a PMO report. You have to have somebody who is capable of driving and bringing the right resources to bear come hell or high water.
This is might be a controversial take, but this might be the one time where technology can't solve all your problems magically. I'm being sarcastic because there's often this perception that technology is the ding button and everything's a technology problem. I could very easily steelman the case for the chief financial officer being the chief capital efficiency, or what we call the Department of Capital Efficiency officer. But your point is quite well taken, that on an operational basis, it has to be someone driving the initiatives underneath the C-suite. How do you think about the changing CFO role? Is the IT department no longer the magical ding button for this wave of transformation?
The biggest gap that I see is if you think something is a technology project, it probably has little business value. The reality is there needs to be some business level integration. A technique, and I think the right thing to say is really not whether it's the CFO, CIO, COO. The bottom line is, if I'm a CEO and I'm going to hold the COO accountable, which you do, right, to do something, then the COO has to say, if this is my team and it comes from across the organization, and if someone isn't performing, I want the right to fire them. I want the right to be able to replace them. I cannot have somebody who doesn't feel, obligated or committed because their boss who pays them and ranks them on a day-to-day basis is asking them, that's secondary, you got to do this for me today. And so you have to lay the law that says, I have the right to replace any of these people on my team with outside people or other people in your organization at your cost to get the job done if I'm being held accountable. And it's interesting how that changes that dynamic. And I was on a program for a very large financial institution, and we were looking at changing, doing a major transformation project for them. And they said, yes, but you have to use my architect. And I said, that's fine, but, right? And the reason is that was a critical role. And if that person did not provide the engagement or the quality of skill that was required to be successful, I would fail. It was a single point of failure in my in what we were doing. And I had little control over the client's, people. We managed that, but it changed the behavior of the organization as a result. And I think that's critical. And it gets back, it's kind of like org change to me. Orgs will constantly change, but at the end of the day, people need to feel completely accountable, and they need to also be rewarded by the people that they're supporting in these types of initiatives cross-organizationally.
I really do appreciate your practical view and telling truth. I feel like we're in a space where there's a lot of exuberance, and it's like, isn't this great? Isn't and when the rubber hits the road, in your career, you've seen some things, and those fundamental principles are incredibly valuable knowledge. So Blake, Yet again, I love having a conversation with you. I love collaborating with you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you, Ariel. It's been a pleasure.